dealing with my male friends, I know that opening up or even just verbalizing their feelings is one of the biggest challenges for them. Like sometimes as someone, I would see that, oh, I see that you might be struggling. I see that you might need help. How can I help? How are you feeling? Can you tell me about your feelings? And they would just be like, I don't know. I don't have words for it.
Of course.
And they would just withdraw, and then they will always be trapped in that like cycle, right? Is this happening a lot among the men who are in your circle as well?
That's the beautiful thing about doing this kind of work, and also the difficult part about it, because you're basically asking these men in your life to opt into a reality that doesn't make sense to them.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. My name is Isabel, your podcast host, and I'm here to find stories that challenge biases we face every day. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Lowhi, an old R&B lo-fi artist based in LA who is also a men's mental health advocate. Growing up between Beijing and the Bay Area, Lowhi brings his bicultural existence to life through music, which has been heard on hit TV series on Netflix, HBO Max, and Disney+. He joins us to talk about his music career and what the world should know about men's mental health. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, on the show, we always talk about mental health, but little do we recognize that mental health is such a wide-ranging, diverse topic that there are definitely a lot of like tiny pockets within mental health that's not really getting enough exposure. So this is why I'm so glad to have our guest for this episode on the show to talk specifically about men's mental health, because he is quite an advocate himself, and also he's a very talented musician. So we'll get to know more about his career as a musician, as well as how he gets started with starting to advocate for men's mental health. So without further ado, let's bring in Lowhi. Lowhi, welcome to Proudly Asian. How are you?
Good. It's 8 p.m. in LA. Excited to be here and talk about what I do, and cross it with everything you talk about with mental health as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with us. As we understand, it's still Friday night for you. But now, before we get started with all the topics that we have in mind for this episode, we just want to get to know you a little bit more by asking you a few questions that we ask every single guest of ours on Proudly Asian, which is, tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up, Lowhi?
Great question. So I was born in the Bay Area, but when I was 6 years old, my family went back to China. So I actually grew up in Beijing between 6 to 18.
Wow.
I call myself Asian American, Chinese American, but really I'm sort of a weird mix between Chinese American, grew up in the Bay Area, but also grew up internationally. So that's something I had thought about for a long time. What kind of Asian am I? Because even though I lived in Beijing, I went to an international school, so very different experience from like the local Beijingers. So I always thought coming back to America would be, coming back home. And then in America, there's all sorts of identity things too, of like, oh, what kind of Asian are you? There's a lot of, if we're talking about the Asian diaspora, like a lot of people grew up in many different ways, came from many different places. So I was always kind of looking for what my place in all of that was. Luckily, specifically for me in college, I remember asking a mentor of mine, was very like Asian American, kind of social justice, mental health kind of spaces. And I asked him, hey, like, do I belong here? Am I a part of this? And I remember him telling me, of course you're a part of this. We want you to share your story. We want you to contribute and be a part of this community. So I'll never forget that. And I think I share that story on every single podcast that I'm a part of.
Wow. But I mean, just hearing that, I already feel the power of those words because sometimes it just really takes, someone to tell you that you belong, you matter, and, you're welcome. And that can make a whole world of difference. But I mean, I want to get to know more a little bit about, like your experience growing up in Beijing. I can imagine because you moved there at 6 years old as an American kid, like, was there ever that reverse culture shock for you? And as you went back to America, I could imagine the same could potentially happen as well, right?
Yeah, I'd say I actually felt more reverse culture shock coming back to America than when
Mm.
I first went to China. I think coming back to America, I realized I think now people understand more. Like kids that went to international school, yeah, their English is fine because it's like an American school. But I think when I was in college, that wasn't as understood of a thing. So a lot of conversations of, oh, but you grew up in Beijing, like why is your English so good? So that question of where I'm from, I always struggled with. Do I say I'm from the Bay Area? Because sometimes I tell people I'm from the Bay Area, and then they're like, "Oh, like I grew up in the Bay Area. What high school did you go to?" I'm like, "Sorry, I lied. I'm
Mm.
not really from the Bay Area." So I bits of both, but yeah, that's always been a tricky question for me.
Yeah. And I mean, just out of curiosity, what's the diversity mix like at international schools in Beijing? Because I think on Proudly Asian, we rarely come across someone who went to an international school in China. So we just want to know a little bit more about just how diverse that city is.
Yeah, I mean, still mostly Chinese. I believe a lot of Korean people as well, and I mean a lot of like ambassadors kids. So just people that are from all around the world as well, but still majority Chinese, I would say.
Obviously, eventually you went back to America, and then now you're a pretty accomplished musician yourself. I'm just wondering, like, at what point in your life did you realize that's something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, it started in college. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue music in college. My freshman year, I decided to do the singing competition, and most people are singing covers. I decided I'll just do my original songs, see what happens. Ended up winning the whole thing, and this is actually my connection to the Asian American community because a lot of representatives from the Asian student orgs there found me. So that was my connection first to the Asian community at USC, and then to the larger LA Asian community. So that's when I started meeting other Asian musicians, artists, dancers, writers, actors. So that started fostering that possibility of, hey, I could do this. I could do this too. And yeah, I'm proud to call out those people my friends now.
I mean, was there any reactions from your parents when you decided to go down this path? Because, like, on Proudly Asian, we always talk about how, like, Asian parents' expectations is like, oh, they would expect us to go in some traditional jobs like accountant, lawyers, and doctors. And whenever we decide to go into some creative roles, for example, musicians, content creators, that's when they would start feeling a bit confused and start asking, like, what are you actually doing? Why can't you do something that makes money? Like, have you ever experienced something like that?
Yeah, I'll tell you about the moment where I felt like it changed. There was I didn't end up being on the show, but I remember I was I was being reached out to from a director from the Voice of China. So we were starting that conversation. So I
Wow.
remember a distinct difference. I remember telling my parents about it, showing them the conversation and stuff, and they were telling everyone in all their WeChat groups. So I remember that was a very tangible difference. Like when they saw that, like, oh, he's actually creating things that, say he's has an opportunity to be on a show that we recognize, that we know. Yeah, I think it's like a sense of legitimacy that they were
Mm.
they were looking for. So that helped a lot, and I don't think it's ever really gone back since that
So
moment.
that's the moment when they realized, oh, our boy is doing something real. But I mean,
Yeah.
of course, you weren't on the show, but then your accomplishments are way more than just being invited on that show as well. Because later on, your music has been featured in some of the popular shows on Netflix, on HBO Max, also Disney Plus. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Tell us about what your songs are like, or if you can share a couple of songs that you would like to call out during this episode with our listeners. Feel free to let us know as well.
Sure. So the recent the song that's done a lot for us, I say us as in me and my music partner. We have a like Mandarin trap and hip hop project called NITEMRKT. So that's been a lot of the music that has placed on uh placed on TV and film. We have a song called Bag That Bow that was on Warrior on HBO Max, as well as American Born Chinese on Disney Plus. And yeah, that it's funny how these things work out, because it's not like I was like, oh, I want my things in TV and film, let me go pursue that specifically as a career path. I think, post Crazy Rich Asians, there's a huge wave and just demand that's continuing right now for Asian, Western Asian content. And with that came a wave of like, oh, we want Mandarin music, we want music made by Chinese American people in our shows, in our movies. So I remember this was before I was even really writing in Mandarin or anything. But for season 1 on Warrior, I was reached out to see if I could translate a really old English song into Mandarin and sing it. And that ended up being my very first TV placement. It was on the season finale of season 1. And then from there, my group got started and I started writing and rapping in Mandarin. So that was like the music that continued to be on Warrior in seasons 2 and 3.
Other than the songs that were featured in the shows, you also create quite a number of songs as well. So if there's one that you want, if our listeners are curious to listen to your music, where would you recommend them to start?
Yeah, it's funny because my personal music is very different from like the rap music that I make. So if you want to hear the stuff that's been on TV, you can search up NITEMRKT. That's NITEMRKT, and Bag That Bow is the song that's probably appeared the most. And for my own personal music, that's just at Lowhi, Lowhi.
I see. Then without further ado, let us take a listen at one of your songs.
代替，幸福有悲伤的过去。太阳前有最大的雨，我不在乎你是否允许。
Actually, last night before I went to bed, I listened to your music. So I was like, oh, that's so relaxing. It's like this perfect, for me, it's like this perfect bedtime music. That's like kind of your personal styles is a little bit more like lo-fi type of vibes, right? Like if you can fully describe, how this style came about, how you eventually went into this space, like how would you put it?
Yeah, so maybe about 2 years ago, I rebranded. So all my music prior to 2 years ago was very like acoustic indie singer songwriter, very very warm, like probably the song that you're talking about. And then I wanted to change up the way I wrote because I was just seeing that, hey, the music I'm listening to is just completely different from the stuff I write. I wanted to expand my creative palette, and I also wanted to integrate Mandarin into my own music as well. I'd always use my Mandarin writing for the NITEMRKT project, but I just saw that, oh wow, like now I can actually write melodic Mandarin music for my own purpose. Mix it with lo-fi, have it be bilingual. It was really a process of becoming comfortable with my own Mandarin, because even though I grew up in Beijing, I spoke Mandarin. Sometimes I was like out of practice, or just being in an international school, we still spoke English most of the time. So it's wild for me telling like a lot of Asian Americans this, like, hey, I grew up in Beijing for 12 years, and sometimes I'm even insecure about my Chinese, and I'm pretty fluent. So it was a process of like, oh wow, this is my language. I can write it. Um, I can use it in my own way. I think Mandarin is such a poetic language, and I've talked to people about this, where I feel that when I speak in Mandarin or I sing in Mandarin, a different aspect of my personality comes out.
Mm.
So I love talking to bilingual people about that, because they're like, "Oh yeah, if you talk to me in a different language, it's like I'm almost a different person."
Yeah, I get you. I can totally relate to that because like now we're based in Hong Kong. We also have a lot of like people who grew up in Hong Kong who went to international schools, and
Yeah.
they might not even speak a word of Chinese, despite they are actually born and raised in like a Cantonese speaking city. So I
Mhm.
totally get you about like growing up in Beijing and still feeling a bit insecure about the language itself. Your music, I mean, from like a listener's point of view, I just found your personal style of music was like so heartwarming. It's like this like space where it almost feels like that chicken soup, which leads us to talk about the mental health part, because like this is also something that you're very passionate about, and you also create a space that also feels like a like a bowl of chicken soup. So I'm curious about how you got started with becoming a men's mental health advocate yourself, because it is definitely a topic that's not really talked about enough. And sometimes people might even think that, oh, so men need mental health? Like, what is that?
Sure. Yeah, I think how I like to talk about the men's group starting is that I had a really close friend in college. We were roommates, and partied together and everything. But I just realized that when emotional things were happening, I'd always go to my female friends to talk about it. This guy that I call
Mm.
my closest guy friend in the world lived like across the way from me. I never went to him to talk about those kind of things, or we never talked about those kind of things with each other. So I was just starting to think about that, and one day I just was like, oh, especially as Asian men, sometimes we don't really talk to each other in that way. Not that we need to talk about emotional things all the time, but just to have that option or that comfort with each other to do so. So I just posted on Facebook one day. I was like, hey, would anybody be interested in an Asian men's kind of support group? I would love to put it together. I didn't really expect much, but it really blew up. A lot of people were really interested, or were like, oh, I'm going to tell, this friend of mine, that friend of mine, and this person, and someone else was like, oh, we can do it at the common room in my apartment. So it all came together very quickly. And I remember sitting in this room, and there were about 15 guys in there, and I was shaking. I was like sweating, because I had never really talked to the men in my life about more serious issues, right? Even something as simple as saying oh, I felt really sad about that, or I felt really angry, I felt really frustrated that something is this way. I just didn't really talk to the men in my life like that. So just even starting that conversation, I don't even remember what I said, because it felt like I just blacked out. But it was really meaningful. I remember after we finished the group session, a lot of guys just stayed after and just talked to each other, right? Like we talked about family as Asian men, our relationships with our parents, with our siblings, stuff that I'd never talked to other men about. But we realized, like, wow, there's a lot of commonality here. It's like, oh, you felt that way about about something your dad did, or your mom did. I connect with that.
Like,
I
me
actually,
too.
yeah, me too. So that feeling of, wow, I'm not alone in my experience, which I think sometimes, man, we can kind of dig ourselves into that hole and tell ourselves, oh, no one will understand. So what's the point? What's the point in expressing it? So that's the value to me of like spaces like that when I made it, but also the spaces I facilitate now, where it's like, it's not that you can't, be hanging out with your guy friends and talk about these things, but there's value to having a specific space for that, where we can come together, and there's a facilitator there. I'm going to ask a question to start that conversation.
Completely understand, because sometimes in order to be able to talk about their feelings or their mental struggles, they also have to sort of mentally prepare themselves before they go into that space, or like that talk, to talk about it. You can't just like go up to them doing an in and out run and be like, hey, let's talk about mental health. And then they're like, what's wrong with you? I mean, I understand that there's this general misconception that men are strong, and that's why the world thinks that they don't actually suffer any sort of like mental health struggles or like emotional challenges. But of course, we know it's completely far from the reality. And even sometimes I think what you mentioned, how like, oh, it's actually difficult to talk to men about your feelings, and you used to go to your female friends to talk about these things. I can imagine, like, even within men, they might be also fueling this kind of misconception that men are supposed to be strong. We don't talk about feelings. So this is why it makes it so hard to open up this space to kind of like advocate for men's mental health, right? But can you help us understand if there are something that you would like to highlight about the whole men's mental health space? What is it that you want the world to know more about, including men?
I'd want them to know that just emotional intelligence is a practice. It's like, if you haven't done something ever in your life, like really opening up to someone, or even crying in front of someone, or just expressing something very real, it's going to feel incredibly difficult. And that's actually okay. That's actually incredibly normal. So that's why I tell the guys in my weekly men's group, say, hey, I don't expect any of these one sessions to just completely change your life. It's not going to work like that. Same with the gym, right? People with their New Year's resolutions, like, oh, let me just go to the gym for the first week of the year and hope that my life will change. It's not. So it's the same with emotional intelligence, like how we express and sometimes ask for what we need, right? Because the goal is also not just for us men, but for the communities around us, right? The partners of those men, eventually the kids of those men. This is where we put in whether it's with me or whether you, as a man, you have a therapist or a coach, where you have some space where you get that mentorship, you get that love, you get that care, so you can be the best, most expressed version of yourself. It's gonna take work to be, a good husband, a good partner, a good friend, even, right? So I want men out there to know that this is a skill that you can develop, and I know how hard it can be at the start, right? To look someone in the eye for the first time and say, I feel very afraid right now. I don't know what's going to happen. I feel uncertain, right? As men, oftentimes we're rewarded for putting up this front of, yeah, don't worry, I got it all together. What do you need? I got you. So there's power in showing up and being vulnerable sometimes, right? Being like, I actually don't know the answer. I want to.
Yeah.
I'm working towards it, but man, I'm a mess right now. Right. And what I want men to understand about vulnerability is that timing is also very important. Right. It's like, where do you put in a lot of your emotional intelligence work in a setting for that, so that when the real life hard moments come, that you're ready for it, that it's not a completely new situation. Right. Like, say, yeah, I'll talk about an example in the last month with my girlfriend, where I know for me before, a pattern is, something someone says triggers a sense of shame in me. I'm not feeling not good or not myself or not enough. Then my pattern is to withdraw. Right. I'll be like, hey baby, I can't do this right now. I need to go. I've been doing this work both on myself and with groups for years now. And it all culminated in that moment where, she said something, I felt a lot of shame come up, and instead of withdrawing, I just told her, hey, I'm feeling a lot of this right now. Can we just sit together in it? And we did. And she sat with me as I sat in silence, just for like 15 minutes. And then I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. Thank you for sitting with me. So it's knowing as men what our natural tendencies are, what our patterns are that will be the destruction of our relationships, whether it's with our parents or our siblings or our partners. And then slowly over time, practicing something different. It's like, oh, I know my automatic is to withdraw. Okay, this time let me try to stay present. Let me try to be open and see what happens. Right. So, and this gets into kind of therapeutical or coaching work, you could say, about, what, say as men, what our internal guiding belief is about ourselves. It's like, oh, if I fundamentally believe I'm unworthy of love, then of course I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to withdraw when there's the most love. So there's a tragedy to that too, right? Because I think sometimes as men, it's easy to feel that no one cares about me, what I think, what I'm going through. But I also want the men to think about too, what love is already around you that you're not willing to accept or receive. So I think the tricky thing about this work is that it's always a two-way street, right? Like say with a partner,
Yeah.
can you do your part? Even sometimes when it's inconvenient, even sometimes when it feels like, oh, this is not what I want to do. So that's why when I think about men's work and what's really helped me in my life is developing a sense of a higher purpose, right? Why am I doing the things I do? Is it a long-term relationship? Is it a family? Is it to serve my community? Right? I imagine you think about similar questions as a podcast host, the why
Yeah.
behind the action. So I think, especially in modern American society, we don't have initiations into manhood to mark the transition from, oh, you're no longer a boy, you're a man now. We have high school graduation, college graduation, but that's different. That's different. So that's the unfortunate part of it as well, where there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of momentum to overturn. But I will say that in recent times, I've been very encouraged by the kinds of men that I see come through my group. Some of them are doing therapy. They already have a coach of some kind. They they work on their own mental health awareness or emotional awareness. So I do believe times are really changing. Right? I can't imagine having said the same thing 10 years ago. So it's the simultaneous thing of, wow, we've come so far. I'm so proud of,
Yeah.
as men, we're learning, we're growing, we're seeing, hey, I can't just stuff all this emotion forever. There needs an outlet. There needs a place either to process with someone one-on-one, or a space like mine where you can come and release something with a group of strangers and to feel that communal connection and strength. Men are learning the power of that. At least that's what I'm seeing in America. I would love to hear about your perspective internationally as well.
I completely understand, not just, from a gender, not men specific or female specific, but then it already on a personal level, it takes a lot of courage for one to realize that they need to work on their mental well-being, that it takes work on their end to make their lives better. Because most of the time when people come across difficult situations, they would always think that, why is that person doing that to me? What's wrong with that person, right? But then when you actually look inwards, like you mentioned, we look into why we feel a certain way. And also recently on Proudly Asian, we talked to a clinical psychologist. When I asked her about how how do you deal with situations when someone is rude to you, when someone just criticizes you? And then her suggestion is not really about how to manage that external force, but really looking inwards and ask yourself, why do you feel triggered by that person? Why do you specifically have negative emotions around that specific comment? Then you kind of look into, maybe you have to trace all the way back. Maybe something happened in your childhood,
of course,
that kind of stuck with you. And then every time when someone says a certain comment, it's almost kind of like a cue or like a trigger that will maybe make you feel, for example, for you had a trigger that would make you feel shame. Some people might feel jealousy, some people might feel anger, something like that, right? So they need to build that awareness, but then it takes courage to build that awareness that, sometimes the way that we react to things or how we think, difficult situations always happen to us. Actually, most of the time it's not about the external forces, not about other people, but we have to really learn how to manage ourselves and change our perspectives, or even maybe put names to the emotions that we are feeling. Because most of the time people will always be like, oh, I feel like a mess, I feel like shit right now, don't talk to me. But then they don't actually do the work of trying to categorize what they're really feeling. I think one trick for myself is that I like to visualize how I feel. For example, if I feel anger, it will be this red cloud in my head. If I feel sad, it will be dark cloud. But no matter how you do it, you can draw it, you can write it out, you can name them, you can label them. But then I think once you're able to put them or manifest them in a way that's visible to you, that's when it's kind of easier for you to maybe learn that, okay, these emotions, I'm done with them, so let me just toss them away, and now let's work with what's left. I'm not sure if that's how you process your emotions as well, but have you also picked up any techniques along the way that work for you?
I think I used to think a lot about techniques. right? How can I breathe in a certain way? That obviously helps. It's somatic. It's in the body. I think again, it's so much through practice, and and that's where I bring it back to the timing for things is so important, because I think to ahead of my life, like to the kind of parent I wanna be, right? Like we all have rights to be, I think, frustrated at certain things at certain times, but I think what I've seen is such a valuable relationship skill, especially as a man, is knowing when to hold off on the emotion and handle something in front of us that needs to be handled, and that's okay too. And I think that's the nuance I want to bring into just the modern conversation about masculinity and vulnerability, because sometimes I hear people say, well, men just need to be vulnerable. Men just need to be vulnerable all the time. We need them to share, we need them to be emotional. I'm like, that's true. That's true. But it's also about, as a man, where is your strength sourced from as well. When I think about mental health recently, I think of the word resilience over vulnerability. Oftentimes, I think vulnerability is part of resilience, right? It's the sustainability of living by opening up to certain people in your life. But also think like the world is a very crazy place. Like you're saying, you cannot control a lot of things that happen. They feel like they happen to you. So, and sometimes I talk about these things for men specifically, but I think it applies broadly as well, where it's like, can you have a sense of emotional resilience? Like it's okay to break down, but do you have like your own ability to build yourself back up, or to reach out to help from a friend, or to reach out to your therapist, to your coach, to your community? Like that's like reaching out when it's the easiest to withdraw. That's, I think, been the biggest challenge in my personal journey, and I see that a lot with the men around me as well.
I completely agree. And I think universally, I just feel like men have even more layers of barriers that get in the way of them trying to manage their mental health, because there's that social norms or expectations that they are supposed to be strong, they are supposed to have the answers to all the situations that come up, and if they are strong, they're not supposed to need help. So I think that is kind of like built into especially Asian men's minds. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like very systemic in a way that's like they think they are born with it. They are supposed to be that way, and they're not supposed to seek help. And I see that, the work that you are doing is very important, because you're really trying to actually take down that barrier, that stereotype that no, actually, we all at some point need help. But then I also want to get your advice about how like men can, really become aware that they can also get help for mental health and eventually start opening up a little bit, right? Because I think from dealing with my male friends, I know that opening up or even just verbalizing their feelings is one of the biggest challenges for them. Like sometimes as someone, I would see that, oh, I see that you might be struggling. I see that you might need help. How can I help? How are you feeling? Can you tell me about your feelings? And they would just be like, I don't know. I don't have words for it.
Of course.
And they would just withdraw, and then they will always be trapped in that like cycle, right? Is this happening a lot among the men who are in your circle as well?
That's the beautiful thing about doing this kind of work, and also the difficult part about it, because you're basically asking these men in your life to opt into a reality that doesn't make sense to them. It's like, oh, I've grown up my whole life not talking about my emotions. That's my solution for life. That's what works. For some men, maybe they were a kid that expressed a lot of emotion, and then they were, shushed for it as a kid. So that becomes their solution, to be silent, to not talk about it. That's what currently works in their lives. So just acknowledge how difficult that is. First off, I think sometimes there can be a sense of entitlement towards the vulnerability of men. It's like, oh, like I'm closest to you. I deserve, your truth, your emotion. But it's very difficult on the back end, and that's why the men's group works, because I'm not asking them to go somewhere that I'm not going myself. Like when I first started my men's group, now when I do the men's group, there's enough guys in there that are willing and open to share. So there's there's a momentum and culture of that now. But when I first started doing this work, I had to lead every time with like a story of my own.
Wow.
Right? Like I call it emotional leadership. I can't ask these men to go somewhere that I'm not willing to share with them or to go myself. That'd be bullshit. Right? So that's what it takes as well. Like literally seeing other men in a space share openly, and not only not get criticized for it, but actually get encouragement for it, or to see that what they shared, it can be a universal experience. And then once that door opens, it's over. Everybody wants to talk. Men have a lot to say.
Amazing.
It's just creating an environment where they feel safe and brave to do so.
The work that you're doing is essentially also maybe for men to learn how to vocalize or like verbalize their feelings. It's like they have to first observe other men doing the same, and then that's when they realize, oh, I had no idea you could put it this way. Like maybe they just previously did not have any words or like the set of language to help them even verbalize those feelings. So I think it's very powerful that just the work that you're doing, you're showing other men who might not be as experienced in talking about their feelings of being vulnerable to be exposed to those who are a little bit more comfortable doing that, and then showing them how this is how you can do it. But of course, that whole like support from fellow men is very important. But at the same time, when they go back to I don't want to say the real world, but then of course they have other people that they have to deal with, for example, friends, families. Like what would your advice be for, like, let's say spouses, friends and families who would like to show their support, but then they also don't know how to, because like I don't think all the friends and families are necessarily trained on how to deal with like a particular mental health situation. They would just be like, hey, let's just talk about it. Like, how do you feel? Why aren't you telling me how you feel? But like you mentioned earlier, this is not the only way to deal with it if the person himself is not comfortable going that way. So what would your advice be for those who would like to help still?
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I'll talk to women about the work I'll do, and they'll just say to me straight up, like, oh, can you fix my guy for me? So that's a tough place. That's a tough place to start. So I think that's a tough place to start, because you're reinforcing his brokenness, right? Oh, you're broken. You gotta fix this, versus just understanding like, hey, men are just a different way, and how we connect sometimes is gonna look and feel different, and that's okay. Oftentimes some men that have heard about my group and come much later, it's because they do it of their own choosing, on their own timing, right? I find it very difficult when someone sends someone my way and it's like, oh, you have to go to Leo's group or we're gonna break up. It's terrible.
What?
It's terrible. I've heard a lot of different things, and I get it. You're trying to make it work, but I think it's also expressing that this isn't a fix. I'm not here to fix anybody. I'm here to perhaps introduce these men to a different reality of how it could look like to connect with the other men in their lives. And if they're open to that, then they'll find a beautiful, welcoming community, right? And that's the thing about, I think, male vulnerability too. It's okay to not be vulnerable in every aspect of your life. Just like there's certain things I tell my friends that I wouldn't tell my parents. Things like that. Like that's okay. I think what I'm worried about and why I created the men's groups is that I often think of, say, a man is really just spiraling down. Like nothing is going well in life. Doesn't feel like anybody cares for him or understands him. If he's just free falling and there's nothing at any point to catch him, we can imagine where that goes. Right. So I'm not here to be the solution, but I'm here to be one of those nets to catch them on their way down so that they don't hit the bottom. And that's a beautiful thing about society now, because we're progressing towards having more of these nets, right? Whether it's therapy, coaching, a group like mine, or even like a podcast or a community that you can feel that you're a part of, feel that you belong, going back to that word from earlier.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how like these so-called maybe like safety nets are being normalized a little bit more. And what you mentioned earlier, how like some of your female friends would be like, "Oh, can you fix my partner for me?" It's like, in a way, it's like kind of fueling that whole misconception around like men are not supposed to be this way. Like, I think one of the biggest challenges for anyone, including men and women, in mental health is really thinking that they are not supposed to feel how they feel. Like once we let go, once we liberate ourselves from that like whole limitations of like, let's say if I feel sad and if I tell myself that I'm not supposed to feel this way, why am I feeling this way? It's like kind of getting in the way of me really solving that issue. And the fact that your female friends are like, "Hey, fix my man for me," it's just like they're not even normalizing their feelings or like behaviors. They are just kind of like making it sound like that my man is angrier and sadder than usual. That's not normal. That needs to be fixed. But then I think the work that needs to be done is to normalize that you feel angry, you feel sad. That's normal because you're human. And that's okay. You just have to complete that whole like stress cycle. You just have to let your emotions run its course and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I call it feeling bad about feeling bad. And that's a terrible place. Terrible place to be, where I look back on a lot of my life and some of my worst moments emotionally were all about that. Like I would feel an emotion and then tear myself apart for feeling that emotion versus just letting it wash over me. Right.
Yeah.
Like that time with my girlfriend I was telling you about. Instead of feeling shame and then feeling shame about feeling shame, I just let myself feel the shame. 30 minutes later, I was good. I was like, wow, that's what it physically feels like. And that's what I talk about in men's work too. There needs to be a tangible difference. Right. Even if a guy's been coming to my men's group for a year plus, and they're like, "Hey everyone, I've been going to this men's group. I've fixed myself. I'm great." I'm like, I don't care what you say. Let me talk to your girlfriend. Let me talk to your wife. Because that's the point of any level of personal development or healing, is that the people you love and that matter to you, that they can feel the difference. Because you can talk all day about, "Oh, I did this workshop. I wanted this thing. I did this silent retreat. I did these breathing exercises." It's like, oh, well, you still lose your temper in a terrible way when something inconvenient happens. So that's the goal of this work, is that these men can lead more fulfilling, emotionally expressive and balanced lives, so they can enjoy their relationships more, so they can enjoy their life and their career more. Not that hard times won't come, but you've developed a sense of self-compassion along with a deep sense of self-resilience to carry you through life in a fulfilling way. So I know I just say men's group work generally, but that's the point of it, to create the better fathers, husbands, brothers of tomorrow.
Definitely a lot of people might also have that misconception around like working on mental health is like you will reach a certain destination, and when you're in a good place, you're good forever. But that's not really the reality. The reality is like, you're in a good place, you're fine, you're in a good mood. That's great. But then how are you going to react when you're in a bad place? That's why the work is going to matter. And it's an ongoing journey. You never reach a point where it's like, oh yeah, I'm good. I'm going to be good from this point onwards. They need to realize that it's a journey. Like, it's not like, oh, I did 10 sessions with Leo and I'm good now. Right?
I wish it was that
I know
easy.
that on your... I know.
It'd be great if it was that easy.
Then you should start charging for it if it's like that magical. But I know that on your IG, you always push out some viral reels that introduce the concept of positive masculinity. Can you help our listeners understand what does that mean, really?
I use the term positive masculinity just because it just feels like the opposite of toxic masculinity. But really, like when I think of toxic masculinity, it's a man's solution for life, right? So it's less so telling him that his solution is wrong, but again, there needs to be a way to show him that, hey, there's actually, there's a different way you could live life. You don't have to live this way. The reason I don't like the term toxic masculinity, because it just feels like, it's poisonous, right? We need to purify it. We need to cleanse it somehow, versus it's more like redirecting that energy, right? It's like it can go to a terrible place, but can we show this man an alternative of where it can go? I think about this question a lot. Like, what is the future of happiness for men? We talk about the loneliness epidemic, especially in America, for men of any age. And what I've seen through the group work is that, and this is interesting, I think you'll find this interesting too, because I think it's a synthesis of all my experiences growing up between the Eastern and the Western world. These are very broad strokes, right? But saying, the West is more individualistic, but the East is more collective based. I see that both parts are actually incredibly important. For men to truly feel happy and fulfilled, one, they need to feel valued on an individual basis, right? Like, hey, you specifically matter. Like, not just because of what you do for our family or our community, but just you, their name. That's why you matter. And also, they need to feel that they belong somewhere, that they belong to a community, and simultaneously are valued as an individual. Because otherwise, the both extremes can be hurtful, right? In the collectivist sense of you just feel like you're a cog in a machine, that you're replaceable, that you belong in the system, but that you're not a unique being in any way, that you're replaceable. Or the opposite of hyper individualism, where you're doing your own thing, you're taking care of yourself, but you don't really have a space where you can rest your head and rest your heart and feel that you belong. So that's the principle under which I run the men's group, right? So even if it's the Asian men's group, I'm going to say everyone's name, as they leave, I'm going to say their names as well. I want them to come in feeling that I value them individually and collectively. Like, you matter individually and you belong here. You belong with us. So that's kind of the model of happiness that I work under. That if I, as a facilitator or as a coach or whatever, that anyone that comes through any of my spaces, that they can feel valued on both an individual and a collective level, then I'll have done my job. And I'll get feedback from guys saying, like, that's why they come back to my groups over and over, because it's not just, I'm just man number 7 in your group. So there's a level of seenness that matters in this work.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, being seen as an individual is just, I don't know if you would say it's a human right, but as humans, we just naturally need that to thrive, no matter like what ethnicity we are, which gender we are. I mean, those are really, really important insights, and thank you so much for sharing. But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Fires. And in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions that they got asked at some points in life. And in Lowhi's case, it will be, biased questions about his upbringing and also misconceptions about men's mental health. So are you ready for all the questions?
Just off the top. Okay, let's do it. It was so serious.
All right.
Let's get less serious.
First question is, can I, as a woman, join your men's group just to see how it is?
Absolutely not.
Is it a zoo?
It's funny, yeah.
Like what?
Isabel, it's so surprising over the years how many times I've been asked that. So I believe in, these spaces are going to happen for men and women to come together and have this conversation. But I also believe in the value of, having that separate space to have our conversations. So
completely.
Even for the woman who asked, I appreciate your curiosity, because it's like they're wanting to learn more, so they can be better for the men in their lives. I know that it comes with very good intentions, and having done this work for years now, the value of having that being a bit more identity specific helps a lot.
And the next question is, I'm going to slightly tweak it, which is,
Please
as opposed to where are you from, where are you really from?
You know what's funny, Isabel? I think that question used to bother me so much, but I think as I've gotten older, I'm just like, if you're asking that with ill intentions, that's on you. That's on you, And sometimes people are people genuinely are curious. But even if they come across as ignorant in a way, they just might not know. And then now I see that as an opportunity of I can tell them about my life experience, how I grew up. So then maybe the next person they meet, like me, that grew up like me, they'll be like, oh, you're like that other person I met. And then that's how these things are normalized. And then we could just learn more about each other.
Like in America's context, maybe after you tell them, your life story, maybe the good question to ask is so what about you? Where are you really from? Because no one is actually from America, right? Except for Native Americans. Right. And the next question, we talked about this a little earlier, which is, can you fix my man for me?
I can't. And because I believe any level of therapy, personal development work, it's always about meeting in the middle. It's where the healing service that you offer, where that meets someone's willingness to heal and to create a better life for themselves. So I would love to tell you and promise you, your man's going to come into my group. He's going to come out perfectly emotionally intelligent. Some simultaneously strong man.
Promise.
That's the man of your dreams. I can't promise you that. But what I can promise is that we ask very real questions in there, and that's an opportunity for men to hear those answers from each other, and to hear from each other's wisdom and learn things that they wouldn't otherwise learn, or hear perspectives that they don't normally hear from the men around them. But no, I can't fix your man. I'm sorry.
And the next question is, men should be strong.
Yeah, I've had an evolving relationship with that question. I do believe we should be strong in many regards. I also believe that we should know how to process our emotions when it comes down to it as well, because otherwise that's like a cancer that kills us from the inside, and I don't wish that upon any man. Just that slow burn. There's a lot of ways to process and talk about your emotions, especially in the modern world. So, find what works for you, right? Maybe it's just going to work out with a good friend, and as you're working out, you just talk through some things. Good guy friend. Maybe you have a good relationship with your father. You can talk with him about it. Just find, it's not about what the specific method is. It's just finding what outlet works for you. Because the goal is for you to be better, so you can be better for yourself, your family, your community.
And finally, one last question in this rapid bias segment is men are supposed to keep all their problems to themselves.
No, I don't think so. It's just a rough way to live. It's just a rough way to live. I know what it's like to have lived like that, years like that, where I didn't cry, I didn't tell anybody about any of my problems, and it was exhausting. It was lonely. It was painful, and it was a cost to myself. It was a cost, to my family, to my community, everything. So, to any man listening to this, or someone who has a man in your life that you care very much about, just know that there are solutions out here for you, and it's okay to reach out for help. And it's okay even if you come to my group and you try it out and it's not for you. Keep searching, because you deserve to find what's on the other side for you.
That's a very powerful advice. Thank you so much for answering other questions in this rapid bias segment. And now for us to close out the episode, for those who would like to follow your work, including your music, and also maybe some of the men who would like to join your circle, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Lowhi Official. That's LOWHI Official. And then in my link in bio, you can find all the sign up links for everything. If you have any questions, just shoot me a DM. We can have a talk about it.
Amazing. And finally, Lowhi, one last question for you. What does it mean to be proudly Asian to you?
It means embracing everything it took for me to exist. Like everything my family had to go through for me to be here right now talking to you. I think sometimes, especially in Asian American culture, we lose attachment to our roots. I think our roots give us a lot of strength. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. How can I allow my lineage, my history, my family to be the roots that I build on?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for the work that you do, Lowhi. And thanks so much for sharing your stories and mental health advice with us. That's very important. We need to keep that conversation going for men's mental health. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, appreciate you.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.
我手一手抱一抱跑一跑，现在这个字随便搞一搞，我飞到太阳让我飘一飘，抱一抱。I'm seeming the ball and I'm bagging it. I might pop up at your residence, yeah. Rocking up weight on my apron. We do delivery catering. Bring it right to you. Skin so thin I can see right through you with the NITEMRKT burning midnight oil. Sap so hot it can wrap in foil. Pull up Lambo, try like Dumbo. Hot pot water, look like gumbo. Used to struggle, now we only order combo. Call time. 一半老百姓，一半路以为的，一半理念，一半乔丹。Yeah, I'm back in a bow. Keep it 100 but stacking a thou. 我刚是来喝水就开始发烧。We back in your head like a cap in a gown. Packing the weight like it's 500 pounds. This beat is offensive, I like how it sounds. Making me wanna go swim up a stream at a breaknecky speed that'll break a canal. Yeah, ain't nothing breaking us now. Came a long way from the dirty south. I'm rocking lit like a disco ball. She look at me like disco Alf. Yeah, shining like ain't nothing matter. I'm hitting the beat like a nail in the hammer. Eating the bow and it's making a splatter. Sky hook Kareem in the air like a jabber. 微信扫一扫，我从你插手包。你知道我们，让我考一考，我来闹一闹，你举我说你好，你的包包真太小。